Okay, yes. So our speaker today is Dr. Michiels van Kessenich, who is a political science graduate of Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And her research interests include political decision-making and public interface, has an interest in the patterns for which public approach and use risk concepts. Particularly, she has developed methods for which children can be taught how to handle the risk concept confidently, which brings us on to our talk today. I'd like to take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining me. Thank you, Scott, for inviting me. As I was preparing this talk with Simon, and Simon told me that he was going to introduce me as coming from a background of risk communication, I thought, well, usually if you speak with academics, they are very particular about getting how do you say this? Get their field of expertise right. So if you're grounded in risk communication, you're not allowed to say that you're doing something else. But then I was thinking about this and I thought, well, actually, risk education is a part of risk communication, because when you communicate, you're trying to get a message across. And if you don't understand the words and the concepts the other person is using, you'll end up not understanding each other and you will have no real communication. And I think this jumps to the heart of the problem we have with risk communication, and that mostly people do not really communicate with each other, and they don't really communicate with the content of the message that they're speaking about. So this is my concern, to find ways for people to be able to properly engage with the stuff that they are talking about, that they're thinking about, that they're contemplating different decisions about. And I would like children to become, because my interest focuses on children, to become confident in using the words that they speak and gouging their depths and really get an understanding of what it is that they're saying when they're just using these words. Because words are not neutral vessels of information. They contain a lot of layers. And if you're not alert to these layers, then you can easily become confused in the way that you use them. So this is my goal. The goal for this talk would be to hopefully engage your attention and hopefully interest you in seeing that this is quite a relevant aspect of the whole field of risk communication, and that we are now in a time when this is an important topic. As Scott wrote to me in the first email, he said, I'm interested in ways to decrease the indubiety and the gullibleness of children. Well, this goes for grown-ups as well. People talk about things and they don't stop to consider the consequences of the things that they choose and the decisions that they make. And hopefully, if we can increase the sensitivity that people have about this risk concept, maybe this will result in being less gullible as well. So that also would be a nice goal. Seeing that we're, as it were, in a pedagogical cave, I can only show you the shadows of the things that we've developed and that we have worked with over the years. I would love to take you outside and actually play the games and see for yourself how playing with the concept of risk can help you get a more enriched idea about it, and also increase your confidence that this is something that you can handle. But unfortunately, I can't, so we'll just have to make do with the digital presentation. Also, about me, I have a tendency to rattle, so please feel free to interrupt when I'm not clear or when I'm speaking too fast. So please do. I'm used to this, so I don't mind at all. So a little bit about me. Simon already introduced me. I think the thing that is useful to know is that I work in a non-academic background. I work for a city council, and I work with people who on a day-to-day basis have to make decisions about risk. I work with firemen, I work with police, I work with the civil servants, and because I worked there, I gradually began to notice that these discussions had a very particular structure, because people were using the word risk all the time, but they were not really engaging it. And by engaging it, I mean that they see the concept for what it is. It is a certain amount of information that you have about a future situation. It is acknowledging that there are a lot of things that you don't know, acknowledging that there are possible scenarios that can unfold, and then you have to choose one of those scenarios and stay alert to the fact that the thing that you have chosen may not be this scenario that's going to develop. So then you have to acknowledge this and take a second step. This was not at all the way how people spoke about the risks. The risks were acknowledged as being a scenario in the future. Then they would automatically gravitate to the worst case. Probability was completely ignored, and they'd start suggesting ways in which we as a city council might spend money to avoid this very unlikely but quite horrible scenario. And this was interesting because I had done my homework and I thought, well, this is surely there is much more than this about risk that you can remark and that you should at least discuss. I mean, you don't have to choose it, but just please at least acknowledge that a risk is a bit more than this really flat horror scenario. And that got me thinking, why is this conversation not taking place? What is happening here? So this brings us to the second sheet, which is a riddle. Could someone please tell me what he or she thinks that this is or are?
Taurus.
Sorry, what?
A Taurus.
Taurus? Donut, yes.
Again. Bagels.
Bagels, good. Yes, donuts, bagels. It's actually bagels, but can you tell me what is specific about a bagel?
Boiled in lye.
Yeah? Something about the shape that catches your attention?
Hole in the middle.
Absolutely, a hole in the middle. If a donut does not have a hole in the middle, would it still be a donut?
No.
No. Our field of risk science is bagel shaped. You see, the science and all the discussions and all the models and all the analysis, that's the flower. But it all circles around the middle, and the middle is the uncertainty. And we might make the middle a little bit smaller, but it will not go away, because if the middle disappears from the donut, it's not a donut anymore. If the middle disappears from risk science, it's not risk science anymore, it's certainty. And we should never lose feeling for the fact that we are not here to help people make uncertainty go away, because that is impossible. Life does not deal life does not allow for us to take away uncertainty out of our thinking. So what we should do is make people more comfortable about dealing with the hole in the donut, in the bagel, and help them to become more confident with the fact that there will always be some uncertainty remaining. But this uncertainty mostly is not like some gray amorphous blob of which you can say nothing. There are ways in which you can engage with this uncertainty and make it a little bit more comfortable. And this is actually what my teaching centers around, because this is something that is missing from modern education. So the structure of my presentation, this talk, is as follows. As first, we're going to discuss why would you want to teach kids instead of grown-ups. I want to talk a little bit about statistical learning and about concept building. Then I'll briefly take you through the lessons that we developed and the different aspects that we highlighted because we felt it was important. An important finding is that your body influences the way that you perceive and that you think. And then, of course, the last question is, okay, so now we seem to be able to establish that this is the way it works. How can we make use of this? Yes. Now, why would you want to teach children how to deal with the risk concept? Well, first of all, I discussed this. Uncertainty is everywhere, both in lifestyle choices as in political choices. And if you teach children this, at least you will help them become just a little bit more knowledgeable in those situations where they will be taken advantage of if they don't understand that uncertainty is everywhere and that they should pay attention to the way that they engage with it. For instance, in buying ineffective skin cream, which will not work, in buying all kinds of insurance that you don't need because the fact that you, the chance that you will be negatively involved in the risk that the insurance covers for is almost negligible. Those are all kinds of phenomena in life that you can engage with more positively for yourself if you have an understanding about uncertainty and about the way that risks are constructed. But of course, this is not the really important issue. Whether or not you need decision-making skills in the 21st century is a no-brainer because the political urgency is increasing. Last week on this channel, there was a professor who spoke about biodiversity, and just today there was an item on the news that the CO2 emissions are back to the pre-corona level and that the weather systems are changing and the political urgency is growing. And this may seem like a political statement, but it isn't, because I feel that we as a scientific community have a duty to stay alert to things in our surroundings that are changing and to try to come up with intelligent responses so that people can deal with these changing situations. And we are really, I'm not exaggerating here, but we are moving into uncharted territory and we have no idea how to deal with this. We have no idea how to handle the crises that are now toppling, that are now climbing up on top of each other's shoulders. We have a climate crisis now, we have the COVID crisis on top of that. We may have political crisis because we have failed to develop adequate political methods to deal with all these crises. And being competent in the decisions, tough decisions, is an element in these political systems that we either put in place, and we have to make a lot of changes, and these are hard changes, or we just, well, we will be in a lot of trouble if we don't design different political systems. So that is my main concern. Also because now a new political actor is coming forward, the youths are taking to the streets and they are saying we are not adequately represented in the decision-making structures that you have put in place, but the problems that are now developing affect us, our generation, much more than they do affect you, and we demand that you listen to us. I think they can be more effective when they understand concepts like risk and uncertainty, because nowadays these concepts are mostly used as weapons, and you should understand that they are actually tools. They are tools to help you to structure your thinking. So my question is, how do you equip people, especially these people, this younger generation, to deal with risk? And my hunch is that they might actually be better at this than we are. And this seems strange because I've not come to the end of the lecture, but I find that giving you the summary beforehand may make it a little bit simpler to follow what I'm saying. So, as I said before, life is all about taking risks. You don't get anywhere if you don't take risks in meeting new people, in learning new skills, in going to a new place, and deciding that someone is okay to start a family with. Those are all risks, and we deal with those risks. Why is it that we don't have the risk as a thinking model feature more prominently in the way that we make these discussions, we make these decisions? I think that we can help each other by becoming more explicit about that all these different and important kinds of life decisions all involve a risk analysis, all involve a cost-benefit analysis. And kids, especially, are born as risk takers. but they unlearn this. I have a picture here of a very old bike. I hope you can see it. This is not quite the same bike that my kids use, but it looks like it. So I want to briefly share a story that when my oldest daughter, Emily, she was, I think, 6 or 7 years old. And we had always been very protective of her. So we'd walk with her to school and we would watch over her with playing. And then when she was 6 years old, her friends said, well, why don't you ride a bike? And we had sort of pushed this before us because we were afraid that she might fall, she might hurt herself. But now, of course, now it's time. So we have to learn Emily how to ride a bike. And you would have us as parents running alongside of her and continuously giving out warnings. You're doing well, but please pay attention. You see, there's a corner over there. You might fall, you might hurt yourself. As a result, Emily was on the bike like this with big eyes, and she was not confident. We were systematically destroying her confidence. And she did learn to ride the bike, but it was a very slow and quite torturous process. Now we move forward a couple of years. I had a second daughter, and then I had a third daughter. I think it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was in the kitchen doing the dishes or whatever it was, that suddenly I noticed that my youngest daughter, Eugenie, who was 3 years old at the time, that I hadn't seen her for a couple of, I don't know, maybe hours. So I asked to my other children, do you know where Eugenie is? And they said, yes, of course, she's gone cycling. I said, what? She's gone cycling? It turned out that Eugenie had gone to the shed, took out one of these old dilapidated bikes that she found there. She had just hopped on it and she started cycling. And she probably had made her own risk analysis, which was fairly rudimental, which said, I just want to learn how to ride a bike and maybe I'll fall, but okay. So Eugenie learned to ride a bike at 3 years old in one afternoon because we didn't do anything. And when we tried to shield Emily from all the dangers, the only thing that we influenced was her competence, and we decreased it. So that for me was a powerful eye-opener. Kids have a capacity for engaging with the unknown, and I think we are not using this capacity, because when you see what the children in schools are focused on, they are focused on facts, not on the ambiguity that is a part of life. They learn that there is only one correct way to spell certain words. There are only limited ways in which you can do a mathematical equation. If people ask you on the map, where are the United States? There's only one country that you can point to and all the rest is wrong. So it's a very dichotomous environment where things are clearly distinguished between right and wrong. And of course, in the real world, most of the things are in gray tones. So, but that is well, that's the situation in which most grown-ups have to reacquire the proficiency with this ambiguity. But now we have made their learning room very small. There is no tolerance for them to make mistakes. Often they have high responsibility. I mean, if Eugenie were 30 years old and she decided to learn how to drive a truck, I think it would be very wise if people who had heard about this had tried to tell her, please don't, because you might cause a whole lot of accidents and you don't want that responsibility. Kids have this possibility because they can make mistakes, and the things that they have to decide about carry less responsibility, so they have more room to engage with uncertainty. In the email that Scott sent me, he said there are maybe a lot of things that kids and CEOs have in common. Yes, but I think that the kids in this specific situation have an advantage because, well, they basically, they can make mistakes, but the mistakes carry not such very grave consequences. Well, I talked about this. Decision making is harder than ever because the risks are increasing and the uncertainty is increasing, and the window of opportunity is closing. And the thing that I want to stress is that in thinking about risk, we make a category, or the concept of risk is not a danger, but it's a tool that can help us to confront our thinking about hard questions and in taking difficult decisions. Now, of course, you are allowed to ask, but isn't this far too difficult for children, because these are really big problems and uncertainty is terrifying. Everyone has problems with this. So I'd like you on a small take you on a small personal tour. We spoke about Eugenie, who took the bike and started riding it when she was 3 years old. That is not the only scary thing she did. On this picture you see her, she is 9 years old and she is now 14 and she is thriving and happy. But when she was 4, she was diagnosed with leukemia. And she was, it was after a period of weeks of growing uncertainty because she was ill and we didn't know what was happening. So we finally took her to the hospital and they gave us the diagnosis really quickly. So then all of a sudden you tumble into this situation, which is really, it's like hell. They took us through a ward that was filled with beds with children, their heads were swollen from the medication, and the doctors, they push you into the deep side of the pool. They tell you your child is really ill. The treatment's going to last for 2 years. She'll develop all kinds of additional illnesses because we don't know how people respond to the medication. And in the end, your child has an 80% chance of survival. So we were just dumbfounded. And Eugenie had to stay in the hospital because she was really ill. And we sat on the side of the bed. Thankfully, the hospital allowed me to stay with her that night. She was very tiny. She was 4. And we sat on the side of the bed and she noticed that I'd been crying. And she took my hand and she said, "Mama, am I going to die?" And I thought for a while, and I thought I should give you an honest answer, because if I don't give you an honest answer, you will lose your trust in me. So I said, well, probably not, because I had it in the back of my head that they say that 80% of the children will survive. And she looked at me and she said, what does probably mean? And I thought, okay, this is a good question. You're 4. So I started to explain. I said, well, probably means that we don't really know, because there are very few children who get this disease and they respond differently to the medications. So in the end, we really don't know what is going to happen with you, but we do know that most kids survive. And because we do not know anything else than this, we have to have confidence that this is what will happen to us. So yes, probably you will live. And she thought about this for a minute, and then she shrugged and she said, okay. And that was it. And then, of course, that was only the beginning of the treatment, and we had to stay in the hospital for months, and the medicines were horrible, and there were all kinds of additional things that happened. And all in all, it was a really tough period. But the uncertainty, it never came back to her as a problem. She simply assumed that this was okay. And that set me to thinking, because I had engaged with the grown-ups who couldn't sort of grasp the risk concept, couldn't grasp the fact that there was an uncertainty surrounding the future, that there were several possible scenarios and that we don't know which scenario is going to develop. And here's this 4-year-old who has absolutely no problem with this. So then I was able to secure a very small grant and develop a pilot to see if we could test this, if we could establish this unconcern with uncertainty in other children, because then this would be relevant. Because in terms of risk communication, if people do not engage with the concepts, that's problematic. If we can find a way in which people can be more responsive to the concept and actively engage with it, well, this is obviously something that could be useful. So, as I said, we started to develop the lessons. I just want to say something more in between, because I'm speaking a lot about the risk concept. And of course, when you think about concepts, I put up a description, and it's not very well readable, but that's not a problem, because I don't want you to read it. I want you to look at the picture that really states very well what a concept is, because a concept is, as it were, a kind of cognitive lens that influences how you see the world. But a concept does a little bit more than this, because a concept helps you to make sense of information. Concepts help you to very quickly categorize a situation. And this is where it can go wrong, because once you have categorized a sensation or a phenomenon as in a specific way, it will then help you to, it will steer your perception. So, for instance, if you have classified or categorized the concept of risk as a negative experience, you will then be more perceptive to the negative aspects that you see in your surroundings. And then it also, and perniciously, unconsciously, pre-selects the different kinds of behaviors that you will contemplate as an adequate response mechanism. So it's really vital that when you think about a concept, that you are aware of the fact that this it's not only a way to represent the way that you engage with the world, it's a very powerful way to color and change and influence the way that you engage with the world. In a way, what you believe is what you see. So, and I don't think that we are sufficiently aware of this in our daily dealings with the words that we use. So I'll come back to this later. So with the grant, we developed a series of lessons with 4 themes. I'll just name the themes here, and then sometimes misleads you. In other words, how do we think when we think that we think? The 3rd lesson is to learn that your body or your effects are involved in thinking. And then the 4th element was that we used the theme of spatial planning to learn that you can use the risk concept to vary the amount of risk. This was on a very practical level, because I got the grant from an organization that did spatial planning, so naturally they wanted to include them in the lessons, but also because actually it's a very good environment in which to engage with risks, because risks in spatial planning are fairly low, and they are political in the sense that you have to engage with other people and you have to have discussions about them, and you will see that people have differing risk preferences. And a hard part of the decision making is also acknowledging the fact that other people have different preferences, and you have to find a shared decision. So actually I was quite happy that I could do spatial planning and not, for instance, lifestyle choices, because they are more intimate, but they have less political and also they are a bit too close for comfort sometimes. So I thought it might negatively impact the effect of the lessons. So the first thing is elementary statistics. Now, this is not about being quantitatively specific in the things that you do. It's not about mathematics. It's basically to evolve an understanding between more or less likely. So we played the game. We developed a game in which we had 3 sets of ping pong balls. We had 1 set of ping pong balls. You see it on the picture. It had 1,000 ping pong balls in 1 ball. And we would add 1 red ball, and we would tell the children, these are all future possibilities, and we have 1 negative possibility, that's the red ball, and this is that your bike gets stolen. Now, would anyone want to come forward and see if they can, do they want to risk this? And we said, if you pull a white ball, you will get a bar of chocolate, or you will get a pat on the head. But there's a risk. So children would come forward, and they would grab a ball, and of course it would be white, and they would grab again, of course it would be white. It would be white all the time. We never got the red ball. So, and then we engage with them in discussions to say, what is actually happening here? Because what you're doing is you're taking a risk. Why are you taking a risk? And they said, well, the risk is very small. Look, the red ball, we can't even see it. So this is the way in which you make it explicit that they're not just playing a game, they are working with risk-benefit analysis. And this seems like a very complicated concept. Kids have no problem whatsoever understanding this. So this, I think, is important. Then we took the big ball of ping pong balls away and we replaced it with a slightly smaller ball with only 100 balls. But the rest of the scenario stayed the same. Is there anyone who wants to come forward? You can win a prize, or either you lose your bike. And then it's interesting to see that you see this discussion in the class emerging, because some kids say, well, wait a second, something relevant has happened. Some kids would have a little bit of trouble understanding it at first, because we would ask them, is the risk now bigger or smaller? And they say, well, smaller, of course, because there are fewer balls. And then the other kids would correct them and say, no, the risk is bigger because it's one red ball, but look, there are so fewer white balls. But all in all, most kids would still come forward and hazard a guess of hazard a risk and draw a ball. And then as the last experiment, we would take the ball with 100 balls away, and we'd put a tiny box with 10 balls. Is there anyone who wants to come forward and take the risk? You can win a candy bar, but you stand to lose your bike as well. And then all the kids said, no, we will not do this. And we asked, why won't you do this? And they said, well, the risk is too large. There is a very large chance that we will lose our bike. And we can't explain this to our parents because, well, they will not agree that this was a good bargain. So I was happy when I saw this, because usually when you try to tell people, I give lectures to older people as well. And then I tell them at the beginning of the course, I say, we're going to do statistics. And a lot of people have this intuitive, they have the bodily response. They go like this, and they say, oh no, it's boring and I don't understand it. And I say, I promise you that all the statistical knowledge that you need to make risky decisions is that you understand the difference between more or less. And this, of course, I'm not speaking to people in a professional situation. If not be so bold as to offer this kind of information to people who work in nuclear plants, for instance. But most of the political decisions are not taken in nuclear plants. They are taken about nuclear plants. When people, for instance, after the Fukushima incident, the German government decided that they would shut down all their nuclear reactors. I'm sure they have made a risk assessment, but what they didn't do was discuss with the public the admittedly, it's not zero. The risk of an incident with a nuclear reactor is not zero, but the risk of continuing the use of regular fuels, those fossil fuels, to satisfy your energy consumption, those risks are really much bigger, and they have a much larger influence on the lives of the people in Germany. So why was this chance not taken to develop a different kind of risk decision? And I think that reframing risks from very complicated scientific graphs into simple, this is more likely than the other scenario, simply developing a feeling of the likelihood, the probability, could help people to get a better understanding of the kind of decision that is made of them, the kind of decision that is asked from them. And I wanted to help the kids get a feeling that numerical information is something that they can engage with. Often numerical information is felt to be both reassuring, because someone who obviously knows a lot has been looking at this and look, he produced this beautiful graph, but I'm not smart enough to understand the graph, so I'm just going to take it at face value. We wanted to help them really get their hands on the fact that numerical information is something that you can work with. So this was the first part of the lessons that we developed. And what I would like to stress is, if you want to help children develop a concept which is really usable in different contexts, you should use it in different contexts. So for instance, when in biology you're discussing biodiversity, and maybe you would discuss this, what was in the paper last year, that 1 million species of animals and plants are on the verge of disappearing. What is 1 million? I mean, how do we make sense of such a large figure? Maybe we could make a game a little bit like this and say, well, can you imagine a ball with these ping pong balls, but then maybe 100 balls? That's how many species of animals there are now disappearing. So if you make it graphic, if you make it simple to understand, children will become used to thinking in terms of risks in different contexts. And that is, I think, important because, well, if you have knowledge, we know from research that knowledge does not travel well between different contexts. So people know stuff, but then they come in a different situation where they could use this knowledge and they don't, because somehow the context is not inviting them to search their brains for this knowledge that they have. So the second part of the lecture is that we tell them a little bit about the way that your brain processes information. We try to keep this as simple as possible. So we tell them mostly about emotional saliency, so the phenomenon that some bits of information have, like, as it were, a red flag attached to them, so that whenever something happens, that these bits of information are really readily available, but this is not an accurate representation of all the information that is present and that is in potential accessible. This is just information that your brain has pre-selected as being relevant. The second thing that we try to alert them to is availability, because of course in the media and in your social media bubble, a lot of the themes get discussed and discussed and discussed again and again and again. And from this, you might get the impression that because it's discussed all the time, somehow it's a bigger issue, but it's mostly not. I try to tell my kids that most things end up in the papers not because they are everywhere and they are a really relevant bit of your life and your experience. They end up in the paper because they are special. So it's mostly the special things that end up in the paper. So you should be critical of the way that you use, for instance, if everyone is talking about something, this is not proof that this is the topic that we need to be talking about. So mainly it's to help children become just a little bit more aware of how information is often not neutral, but that there are different ways that we can look at this information, and also that there are different interests behind the choices that are made in the information that is presented to you and is not presented to you. Again, I do a repeat because I think that it's really important that we get an understanding of what the centrality of the risk concept actually is. It is a tool that helps you to handle uncertainty. Basically what it does is that it helps you to look and distinguish between the knowledge that you have and the knowledge that you don't have. Especially if we look into the future, there are some things that we simply don't know. And the knowledge that we don't have is as relevant as the knowledge that we do have. And if you can somehow train yourself, and if I go back to the example with Eugenie, there were of course other children in our year, and when I spoke to the parents, a lot of people did additional information. For instance, some people concluded from the fact that the doctors had said 80% of the children is going to survive. Some people fell into despair because they were certain that their child was not going to live through the treatment. And what they do is they actually add an additional 20% so that they now have a complete picture of the information, but it's wrong, because the only thing that they do know is that they have an 80% chance of survival. So we really should be more attuned to the fact that that there is knowledge that we don't have. The second thing is acknowledge the fact that you have feelings about things. If you take a moment to just ask yourself the question, I see this decision, this is what I know, what do I feel about it? Because if you have very strong feelings, this will influence your decision. Again, if you make, for instance, a spatial planning decision, and you will, for instance, you have to make a decision about traffic. And just last week, there was an article in the paper about someone being killed. This is going to influence you. And this is going to make certain amounts of information, certain bits of information, more salient than other bits. And I'm not saying that you should always decide against using and acknowledging this emotion, but if you don't take it into account, it's going to affect you without you being aware of it. And this is the way in which many political decisions are taken, because there's a lot of emotion and people try to avoid obvious but not very likely scenarios and ignore the scenarios that are far more probable but just not so very spectacular. Actually, this comes back to what I just said, that the word risk has actually a semiotic function. It's like a danger sign. Oh, this is one of my daughters coming in now. So we should be aware of this, that the risk is often used as a semiotic symbol, and it's not used to explore the question that's before you. So we have to get a grip on our feelings about the risk concept as well. And we do this with games and play. And now I come to the third element of our lessons. We really want children to get an understanding that their body influences the way that they decide about what kind of behavior is good or not so good to do. So ideally what we want to do is take them to the gym court or take them to a playground and to ask them, climb this rack or climb up in the rope, and just register what you feel. Just try to notice the moment where you get, for instance, a knot in your stomach, and then try to be very attentive to what this knot tells you. And also notice other signs in your body. Do you get slippery palms? Do you feel that you're turning red? Are you becoming warm? Those are all signals that your brain uses to make sense of this new situation. And sometimes these signals are really relevant. But there are other situations in which, especially when you deal with abstractions, which are mostly not scenarios that are unfolding in the here and now, but are things that you have to think about. For instance, like, different potentially dangerous behavior. You get signals, and they influence the way that you think about those scenarios, and they influence the different kinds of behavior that you will then contemplate. So I just have to see which sheet I am. Normally we would play the games, but this is unfortunately impossible. I do have one thing that I usually play when I'm on tour doing workshops, and this is the, I don't think you can see them. These are paper clips, because obviously I can't travel with ping pong balls. I thought I'd make a version with small objects that travels, and in this paper clip I have one red paper clip, and I put it in, and I invite people to try it for themselves to get an understanding of what it feels like to have a very small probability of something happening. So we have people who dig their hands into this bowl of paper clips and try to find the red one. And I can say that I think I have given about 20 or 25 workshops. We have never been able to retrieve the red paper clip. And this is just 2,000 paper clips. So when you think about the risks that we are trying to mitigate in spatial planning, especially the risks of accidents with hazardous substances, we talk about probabilities in terms of 1 in a million. So that means you have 500 boxes of 2,000 paper clips, and then first you have to identify the correct box with the paper clip in it, and then you have a 1 in 2,000 chance of actually getting the paper clip. But these risks are given a lot of political attention. A lot of money is going into mitigate them, and I'm trying to sensitize people to the fact that maybe this is not the best way to spend your money, because of course money seems trivial, but it is a way in which we as a society make happen certain political choices about what we should pay attention to and what we don't pay attention to. So for instance, we have we spend a lot of money in making sure that streets are accessible at all time for the trucks from the fire brigade. So the streets should be wide, and they should be flat, and they should be easy to negotiate. And of course, fires get prevented in that way. Fires get extinguished a lot more quickly than if the street was not so wide. But if you ask to compare the risk of the risk that you mitigate in this street by making it accessible to the truck, by the risks that the children run because they can't play in it, because the street that's constructed in this way also invites speeding. And then it becomes a different kind of discussion. And I find that we're only at the beginning of making these kinds of trade-offs, that every time you mitigate one risk, actually what you do is you put another risk in place of it. And the political discussion should be about, okay, so we can't take everything away. Which is the risk that we pay attention to? But this is something that still needs working on, because grown-ups have less chance to work with risks and less to play with risks. And of course, the errors that they make can be corrected as easily. Also, what I find in this is that once you have acquired for yourself a certain ease in dealing with the risk concept, and I'm speaking now when I see this in the children, you still have to be very gentle when you engage with other people, because I also find that it's very difficult that if you haven't learned, if you haven't found an ease in dealing with this concept, it's very hard. Making risky decisions is cognitively and emotionally very hard. There's a reason that people often choose the risk that is looming large, because it's so horrible, even though the chances that it will occur are fairly large. So we have to be really gentle in how we structure the conversation between the people who say, well, let's be more attuned to what we actually know and how affect comes into this, and the people who are still in denial about what kind of concept this actually is. So this was something I also found. Okay, we'll ignore this. And then of course we come to the application. The kids work on paper, but these are real decisions, because they get given a map. They get given the functions that they have to plan. So it's not just the nice things. They also have to plan a factory. They have to plan a busy road. They have to plan, they have to think about the jobs of the people that work in their town. They have a limited budget, so they can take certain measures, but they can't do everything. And what is also very important is that they have to present a design and then defend their design choices, because I wanted to see if they had understood what we wanted them to do, and if they use these words, and if they use cost-benefit analysis in the choices that they make. I also emphasize that this is not about getting it right. This is not a quiz. There are no right or wrong answers. There are different choices that reflect different preferences. So what would be a wrong design is a design that has not been contemplated. All the design choices that have been thought about, that have been debated in the group, are good. And this is also, I think, something that we need to stress, because again, in school, children are taught that you have a right answer and a wrong answer, and often in politics, this is not a viable distinction. So I wanted to sensitize them to that. And also, of course, there's always a possibility of a negative scenario developing, and I want them to understand that this then not automatically means that they have failed, that their concept, that their design is wrong, because we don't have all the knowledge, and what we should do is make our decisions as carefully as possible, and then we can rest assured that whatever happens, we are not gods. We can't take away all the harm and all the horrible things in the world. We can engage with them responsibly and try to do this as seriously as possible. And then when something goes wrong, we don't have to point fingers. We don't have to, we can of course analyze what went wrong and maybe try to learn from this. But assigning guilt, which is something that very often happens, is the wrong reflex. And I think this is important to stress, because one of the reasons that we are focusing so much on guilt, and we have this idea that a politician or a decision maker should somehow be infallible, is one of the reasons that it's become so hard to attract people to politics. I mean, in Holland, if, for instance, I was in the city council 30 years ago, and then it was already hard to find people who wanted to do this, because they said it's very hard work, and well, you get covered in people are very negative about you, and when something goes wrong, you will be they will tell you that you are guilty. And I think it's important to stress that decision making always has a certain chance of things going wrong, and this should not stop us from making decisions. And I really think that this is worth stressing, because we are fallible, and we should be kind to each other and acknowledge the fact that people can make decisions that turn out the wrong way. So then we have, okay, so now we did a couple of pilots. You might want to know, did they work? We had the first pilot, we had a qualitative post-test after 9 months, and this showed that the children had retained the concept and that they used them in their discussion and in a new spatial planning assignment. We gave them a case of planning windmills to provide sustainable energy, and we looked at whether they thought about the negative effects, whether they thought about engaging with other people to see if there might be other people who had different points of view, and they did all this. And there was a recommendation that this might work with adults as well. The second pilot taught us something which is important, which was not very nice, because the second pilot was actually a disaster. Because the first pilot we did with teachers who had been well briefed, and we tested them to see if they got an understanding about the concept, and they did. The second, the teachers mainly glossed over their the instructions, and what they did was, it was actually to watch, because they would tell the children that we're going to talk about risks, and risks are not a problem, only their body would be like this, and the kids ignored what they were saying, but they picked up on the bodily, the subliminal conversation of communication very well. So the kids picked up that this was something that you really did not want to engage with. So this is vital, and this is something that I want to come back to at the end of the lecture, because this is actually a problem, because most kids pick up on what we try to teach them fairly quickly and have an ease in handling it. It's the teachers and the parents and their broader social community who resist that risk is a tool and say, no, risk is a danger, you should avoid it. So this was instructive and painful. And then the third pilot, I come to the third pilot because we used older kids here. They were 13 years old, they were in secondary school, and they knew way more than I expected, because I had explained the risk concept to them, and we'd been speaking about this for a couple of lessons, and they came back to me. They said, look, if we understand you correctly, if you want us to make an analysis of the risk, we should differentiate between small risk and big risks. Is that right? I say, yeah, that's right. And they say, we should prioritize our attention to important risks. Are we right? I said, yes, again, you are right. And they say, then why are we speaking about fire brigades and about plane crashes and about terrorist attacks? And we should be discussing climate change, biodiversity, waste management, toxic waters, a healthy environment. These kids, and I'll come to the sheets now, these kids had the world in their heads, but they had no way to deal with it. And this is when I realized the thing on the risk, the drawing on the risk is a drawing that the kids made in reflection to the lesson, and the drawing on the rest on the right represents a child that has the world in his head. These children are fed with all kinds of information, troubling information about the world that they inherit, and we don't give them a structure with which to make sense of this information and to somehow find a way in which this might influence their capacity to do something about it. And then I thought the risk tool is actually, it does this. It can help children make sense of this information, to rank order the things that they find important, to rank order their preferences, and to help them to steer their behavior. So I really feel that we have a responsibility to help children to organize their thinking by making them use the risk concept. So I come to the last sheet with, again, the general conclusions. We are born with the capacity to handle uncertainty, but we don't make use of this, and as a result, we lose it. The risk concept is a tool for using. It's not a problem to avoid. We should be very aware of the false dichotomy between thinking and feeling. This is something we haven't even begun to explore. Mostly when people become emotional, we disqualify them in a political discussion. But those are just the people that we can see that their effects play a role. But in everyone, how you think about things affects your thinking, it affects your perception, it affects your consequent behavior, and we should be far more alert to this. Helping children to get a grip on these concepts and to alert them to the importance of their feelings will empower them in decision-making contexts generally, so not just in a political context. We can lay the foundations of a different world, and we desperately need new political mechanisms to confront the problems that we are moving into. And children are the future grown-ups. They are the decision makers of tomorrow. They have huge tasks before them, and we owe it to them, at least, to offer them a preparation for this role. I think this is it. This is it.
Great. Yeah, thank you for your talk. Can't applause, so just imagine there's some. We're going to open up for questions.
Yes.
If you do have a question, you need to raise your hand to do that, click on the participants menu, and then you should get on the right, there should be an icon for raising your hand. Otherwise, you can just drop a question in the chat and I'll read it out for you. Yeah, so we've got a few come through. Alex, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I guess, like, one thing that I would consider interesting looking through all this is with the example with the ping pong balls and the paper clips. Have you looked at, like, inverting that? And, for example, asking children whether they want to take the risk of, if you get the red ball, you get a lifetime supply of chocolate bars. If you get a white ball, you owe me a chocolate bar. And because I don't know, it seems like children are more comfortable taking risks, perhaps because they don't have such a developed effective response or a risk concept to contextualize what these risks are. And that develops as they get older. And it's perhaps like, yeah, the education needs to focus on children getting that effective response built up as quickly as possible, or learning to deal with that. But yeah, so like, have you looked at flipping the ping pong ball situation around, or what do you think would happen?
I have not looked, I have not been able to do a pilot about this, but I have been thinking about this because there's, of course, another domain in lifestyle choices where we have a huge health crisis because of faulty eating habits, because of people taking up smoking, because of alcohol abuse. And here, of course, the situation is reversed. The chance that nothing's going to happen to you is almost zero, but everyone also comes up with their grandfather who was 90 and who smoked heavily and never saw a vegetable in his life. So here, I think it's interesting what you say, because yes, I have thought about this, because you say children haven't developed their affect, and I think this is a very good formulation, because what I think I see is that people have, in general, a very low granularity or refinement in how they think about risk concepts. It's very often it looks something like, if I see something and I want it to happen, it's good. And if I see something and it's bad, it will not happen to me because my grandfather. So it would be really useful to see if, for instance, in the concept of smoking, we had this bowl, and now most of the bowls would be red. And the red bowls are, you take up smoking and something bad happens to you. And of course, there's a very small population, percentage of population who have very good genes, or I don't know what they have, but they will not be negatively affected. But try to engage, try to find that white ball and see if we can help them by actually touching the quantitative information and getting an almost physical understanding of what low probability actually means. That maybe we could use this in helping people to make different choices, stay away from smoking and fatty foods and stuff like that. So yes, I think that what you want to do is to create as detailed and sophisticated and effective response to the risk concept as possible. I've unfortunately not been able to test this, but it is absolutely interesting. So thank you. Good point.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We've got another question by Adolphus, if you'd like to ask yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. First of all, thank you so much, Professor, for the very interesting presentation today. And I basically want to give a bit of remark because it really brings me back some old memories when I was in kindergarten, because back then we had some activities outside of curriculum whereby we had what we call those activities that actually sort of stimulates our thinking in making decisions. Like, for example, they gave us a fixed amount of money, and we have to decide what resources are we going to get. So they make a shop kind of concept, and then we have to play as the let's say a customer that we have this things to get, but we need to manage the income and make a decision as to which one should we prioritize and which should we not. And I think this is actually the concept is pretty much similar in the games that we just talked about today. But I think the only pity is that because in Singapore, many of these things are being given less emphasis, because most of the time the priority is on the hard sciences, the hard subjects like English, math, sciences, all this, the more theoretical side of things. But there's very this lack of practicality in the education system, which is what's lacking in Singapore. So but I really definitely would be it'd be nice that there would be what you call a introduction of this kind of conceptual studies for kids, because I think this idea of risk and the decision making would be better if it's cultivated since young. So I really enjoyed it, and what you just presented here as well. And also it a few years ago, I was actually when I was still doing my undergrad in Singapore, I was part of this communication group. We are called the Young Educators in Science program, and we actually try to reach out to the different age groups from the young to the old, and to try to explain to them different concepts of science through games and visual tools, like what you just did with the paperclip and the ping pong balls kind of model. And definitely it would definitely trigger the interest of the kids. But of course, at the same time, I think there's also a need to re-emphasize why we're doing this, and how does this relate back to the daily kind of the daily life. And I think one of the biggest obstacle I think amongst us is always this communication skill, because many times when you're too into the topic, we tend to lose a little bit of this this, how do we actually relate to the different age groups through examples in their daily lives and bring it to the context that they can understand. So I think that is something that I noticed that as I was part of this communication program. So I'm not sure if you actually agree on this point as well. Why is this happening? As we learn more, we tend to lose this relatability in some cases.
It's a good question. It's a very deep question. It's actually the question that I wanted to put before you. So thank you for spoiling that opportunity for me.
No worries.
This is actually, I was only joking, but this is the silver bullet question, because the real problem is that I go up to people and I say, I would like to do risk lessons. And then at first they go like, oh, no, we don't want to talk about the dangers or problems. So I very patiently explain to them, it's not about problems, it's not about dangers. And the kids have no problem understanding this. And then they think a bit about this for a little bit. And then they say, but if the kids already understand this, why do you want to teach them? So, and then I come to the real problem, because actually what happens is we have to somehow overcome the non-engaging. Once people have learned to understand, have sort of hardened, they have a hardening. So a writer I read spoke of a hardening of the categories if you grow up. So once we have firmly established that a risk is something that we don't want to engage with, it's almost impossible anymore and say, okay, so well, let's try and do an experiment about this. And I really don't know. I don't know how you could, unless of course you start at an early age. Maybe the one thing I thought about giving you all an assignment, say a week before this talk, so that you go out, find a kid. Almost all kids will do, as long as they're between 10 and 12 years of age, and you try to talk with them about a risk, and you try to maybe play a game with them, and then maybe you will find that the child after a week or so engages with you and is actually more intelligible about this than you were at first, because this is something that I noticed when I spoke to people. For instance, if I do a workshop, usually there's some kind of an organizer behind this, and then you have a couple of talks with them as well. And a lot of them came back to me later and they said, this was so funny because I went home and my family asked me, what did you do today? And then I explained to them that we were going to do a workshop about risk. And the kids would sit up and say, oh, what is this about then? And they started explaining, and they came back to me and they said, the kids all loved it. The kids all understood what it was that we were speaking about, and they could relate this to the experiments they had in the playground and dealing with friends, and indeed climbing trees and actually learning. So maybe, Adolphus, maybe this is a beginning of an answer. If you want to breach the barrier between children and grown-ups, maybe we should find a way in which grown-ups engage in serious conversation with children, and adopt the role where they learn from the children. And I understand that this is very counterintuitive in our culture, because we have a very linear approach in how we think about life. You start small and incompetent, and then you grow big and competent, and then in the end you shrivel and become incompetent again. But maybe, sorry.
No, that's a good way to put it, actually.
So maybe what we should do as grown-ups is be a little bit more humble and accept that when we grow up, we lose certain capacities, and those capacities are not lost. They are just sitting in a group that we normally do not identify as teachers. Certainly, my kid in the hospital bed, she taught me a lot about different ways to look at the information that was given to us, because she heard only what she heard, and she did not fill it in with all the additional things that she had in her head, which were not relevant. So she didn't. So I think this is an answer, I hope.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good points that you raised. So yeah, and thank you so much for your insight. And once again, I really enjoyed the presentation. And at the same time, I wish our kid well, and we wish everything goes well for her as well. And yeah, so thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adolphus. Helen, I think you have a question.
Yes, I'm off mute now. You can hear me. Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Camera on as well, so you can see me. Yes, I think I've turned it off before.
There you
yes,
go.
That was a really interesting talk. Thank you. I've lots of food for thought. Just by way of background, I'm a statistician myself, so your experiments with the picking balls out of bag and things like that, I think it's really fascinating. I think you've hit the nail on the head when you said, because the school, my perception is that the school system, as the way it's encouraged, certainly in this country, is it's right or wrong, and saying I don't know is seen as a weakness. And actually, I think I don't know should be seen as a strength, because it's you're being honest about the state of your knowledge. Absolutely. And I think that's really true. I'm actually coming to it from a slightly different perspective. I'm fascinated by the role of the media in all of this, and I didn't know whether you had any thoughts on that. So the way that I see it, the media, either when something is uncertain, either they seem to come down on the side of certainty, in which case if they're then wrong, that undermines public trust, or they will focus on a worst case scenario. So an example in the media today is the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine trial, where there's an adverse reaction, so they stop the trial, which would be a natural reaction because you need to find out why this adverse reaction has occurred and so on until you proceed. But the way it's presented in the media is, oh my goodness me, this probably means there won't be a vaccine and so on. And I suppose in a very convoluted way, I'm coming around to the question of thinking, have you thought of doing some of the kind of work you do with people working in the media? Because I think they're in such a powerful position to influence the way people handle uncertainty and so on. Do you think there's any scope for that?
Good point. The problem, as I see, I have thought about this. As maybe you recall that I did a sheet for the kids to help them get a little bit of understanding about how their brains work, and their brains work also by selecting information conforming to the availability bias. So I try to alert them to the fact that something that's all over the paper. For instance, we did an exercise when I said when I asked them about the concept. What are the things that you think about when you think about risk? And almost always a kid would call out and say, "Oh, a plane crash." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting, the plane crash. So why do you come up with this? Is this something that happened in your country?" No, it didn't. Did it happen last week? Yeah. And then another child would say, no, it didn't happen last week. It didn't happen all year. And then I said, well, why then do you bring this up? Why is this risk? What do you think about this? And then they said, well, if it's in the paper, you get all these pictures, and it's on the news, and people are interviewed, and there's fire, and there's blood, and there's, this is like a very not to miss event, and the fact that it's highly improbable gets left out of the equation completely. The problem with engaging with the media is that what I find is that everyone is pulling on this rope in the same direction, because you have politicians who are decision makers, and a politician who says, I don't know, knows one thing for sure: he's not going to be reelected, because we want someone to be certain. Politicians go to scientists and say, don't give me maybes, give me facts. The media want something that can be read and digested in 20 seconds. I mean, slow journalism is called slow journalism because it's rare. Normal journalism is you can breathe once and then we switch to a new topic. So the problem is there are no real powerful interests that can balance this equilibrium. And I see that this is problematic, because if you take time, if you discuss this with people, most people will acknowledge that it actually feels better to know that there are fors and against, and that they are not the only ones who sometimes feel that they don't know stuff. I think in terms of emancipation, we should give out prizes to people who say, I don't know. I don't know all the time. I don't know many things. We really should have maybe a change in our culture in which we give a positive tag to people who profess to uncertainty. But now we don't. So the only thing I can, so I don't think that speaking to media will help, because I think the average journalist will be intelligent enough to understand what we are trying to tell them. And they will also say that if you ask me as a person, of course, this is the stuff that I would like to write. But I could never sell this because it's a way too long article, and it doesn't give any clear objectives to what we should do, and it doesn't give any, it doesn't substantiate a specific decision being made. So I'm almost with empty hands. I would welcome. What we do have is a move in responsible journalism, where people say, we want to write the longer articles, we want to tell that we don't know everything, but it's a very small group, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really fascinating area. I think it's a very open question, but thank you. And thank you again for a fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Really
Can I say one more thing? Because I've just thought of something that might, and this doesn't really address the media, but it does another way in which we might, as a scientific community, be given more leeway in professing uncertainty. And this is that many research institutions are now looking into making their data and making their articles more like an open source, so that more people can profit from the research that is done and the articles that are written. If more people read this, if more people get a first-hand experience of what a real scientific article looks like, because most scientific articles that are reported in the papers are condensed to a paragraph with a conclusion, and then all the middle bits, which are really relevant, are left out. So I think that making this change to open source publishing and engaging with each other in slow discussions might help us a little bit. But this is something that it will take a generation, unfortunately.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've got another question from Enrique. I'd like to ask you a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much for your talk. Maybe you are familiar with the idea of post-normal science, which briefly says that the people who are going to suffer the effects of the decisions should be included in the decision-making process. Couple of weeks ago, schools reopened here in Spain, and prior to that, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, a group of experts was organized by the government to define the protocols and procedures that have to be followed in schools due to COVID-19. And I believe no kids were asked to define these protocols.
No.
And kids, like teachers, represent a group that is going to suffer the effects of those decisions, not the experts. Do you think kids should have been asked? And if so, how?
Absolutely, absolutely. I fully agree to what you say. We have a political structure in place that says that we have a democracy, but who gets access to the democratic structures of decision making? That's everyone over 18 years old. Now, if you look at the way this age has developed, of course, at one time it was only the rich. Then at some point it was extended to males over 25, and then the democratic the people who were thought eligible to engage in discussions has become wider. But ever since in Holland 1923, I think, it has included the people that are 18 years or older. But if you look at the education level that people at that, this is a century ago. A century ago, people over 21 of 23 were given voting rights, but most of them then had a primary schooling. A lot of people ended their schooling at 12 years old, and the amount of knowledge that they had was mostly around about their country and about very number of other topics. If you look at the education level now, I think that the time is more than ripe to lower the voting age to 16 or maybe even lower, because as you say, the people who are confronted with the negative consequences of the decisions that are made now are already alive. They are marching on the streets. Now in the Corona crisis, they're asked to do all kinds of things that will severely limit their possibilities to get a good education, to find a job, to start their lives. So yes, they should be included in the political decision-making structures. I don't understand why, for instance, you have all these democratic experiments now. You have, for instance, in Amersfoort, which is in Holland, they had this panel where they they randomly selected, I think, 100 people from the population. They selected a couple of experts, and they gave these people in 2 weeks time, they gave them all kinds of information. They could appoint other scientists, gather all the information they had, they wanted, and then make a decision about a topic that expressly concerned Amersfoort. No kids were included, and I don't understand why, because kids have much more knowledge, they're much more open to the world, and again, they are the recipients of the negative consequences of the decisions we take now. So yes, I think they should be included, but I do not see it happening.
Yeah, but how would you do that? I mean, ideally I would like to include them as well, but would you just engage with them, like having a, I don't know, normal discussion or something? I see the theory, I like it, but it's the application where I don't know. Maybe I've never worked with kids, so that's why I'm lacking of experience. But that's,
well, I see a cultural construct in your 18th birthday. This is a boundary that we've defined. You get a normal, happy, irresponsible 17-year-old who says, "Dad, can I borrow the car?" And you say no. And then the day that he turns 18, you say yes. And I don't really understand what has changed. For the same, if this were a child who, ever since he was old enough to know the concept of responsibility, thinks about this and has a great way in looking to his surroundings, and he wants to borrow the car when he's 17 and he's got a license, I see no reason why the age should be a barrier in which everything changes. And we have, I don't know how this is in Spain, but in Holland, children in the secondary school from the 5th grade, so then they're about 16 years old, we have a topic in school that is, it's called maatschappijleer. So then the children learn about the country. So they learn that we have how our government works. They learn how different groups in society have different interests. But this is all theoretical. They don't learn the hard bits. They don't learn that all these people living in the same country have different interests, and somehow they have to reconcile all these interests. So they learn the theoretical thing, they don't learn the practical thing. So I think that we have a situation that is eminently suited for kids when they're 15 or 16 years old. We tell them, we say, well, firstly, we're going to teach you a little bit about how things are organized in this country. These are laws, these are the regulations, these are the organs that make the decisions. This is our parliament. And now we're going to engage you because these issues concern you. And, you know, there are many people over 18 who have the right to vote, but they don't engage, or they don't even turn up, or they have very, to my view, very imperfect ways of finding information on which to base their decision. And what I find in my working with kids is that usually, not all of them, but many of them, they feel very strongly about the importance of the issues that they would like to be able to decide about, but they're excluded because of their age. So I think we should at least do an experiment and include them in the other experiments that we are, at least in Holland, we are doing this because we want to revitalize our democracy. So I see no inherent reason not to include them.
yeah, okay. Thank you very much for
You're
your
welcome.
Thank you. Alex, I think you've got another question.
Yeah, just to sort of playing devil's advocate a little bit, but on this sort of logic, like, what do you think about children gambling? Like, is there an issue with children engaging in like all these apps where you pay money and like, or like even straight up gambling apps? Because I guess the rationale of restricting gambling is that you don't want children doing it because they might not be completely aware of just how destructive, because it's not just the loss that you might incur monetarily, it's the fact that it has an effect on you that you might not immediately be aware of. Do you think, based on the idea that children are actually quite good at dealing with risk, is it actually okay for them to engage in these kind of activities?
What I was trying to convey, I thank you. This is, I
don't mean to, but like, obviously I don't think they.
No, it's good that you ask this, because this is an example that I did not specifically name when I briefly touched on harmful lifestyle choices. But for instance, for the Chinese community in the Netherlands, this is a huge problem. There's a lot of pathological gambling going on, and it's a very compounded issue because, as you said, it's not only about the financial losses, but there's also a very large honor component. So this is something that sort of negatively reflects on the person you are and the responsibilities that you have towards your family and towards your name. So this is a very relevant thing to tackle. And when I suggested that kids are good with dealing with the risk concept, this is only the theoretical starting point. So if you acknowledge the fact that they will be able to understand what you're talking about, but this is the theoretical starting point, you should then become specific about the context in which you want them to apply this thinking in terms of risks and the costs and the benefits of behavior. Yeah, I think we should do this. I don't immediately know. Getting the idea about the practicality of the concept across is still a problem. In Holland we have the GGD, which is an organization that thinks about all issues about health, and gambling is of course part of an unhealthy and risky lifestyle. So they do have material about this, but as far as I know, they don't engage with specifically helping children to get an understanding of this risk concept. What they do is inform kids that this is dangerous and it has negative consequences. And this is, of course, the way that risk communication is normally formulated. And then kids go into the, yeah, sure, I know that things can happen, but this does not concern me because I'm special. And unfortunately, this is where the thinking stops. So yes, it's relevant. Yes, I think it would be feasible to develop a specific lesson or information package in which you try to get children to engage with what it is that they're risking and really get an understanding for how big the chances that in the end they will regret what they chose. Is this an answer?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an answer. It's that fact. Yeah, it's a very, very multifaceted.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Problem, but yeah, it's absolutely something that when it comes to lifestyle choices and trying to engage children to make healthier decisions and things, getting an understanding of situations where they might not quite have any kind of notion about quite what they might be at risk of losing, and making them aware that there are cases like that will exist, that you will come across, and that these are dangerous, I think, is something that children need, like, do need to learn. I don't think it's a bad thing to have that kind of like a certain degree of anxiety and fear. But yeah, perhaps things go a bit too far. But yeah, thank you very much for the answer.
Is this what you're afraid of? That this will only make them anxious and it will not lead to productive? Because this is something that I sometimes encounter. If I say we should teach children this, the grown-ups say, "Oh no, but this is the big bad world. We should not engage. We should not tell children about the fact that this world is also there. They're young. They should preserve their innocence." Well, of course, my children, when they were 12 years old, they would share execution videos from people in Syria being beheaded. So this was a little bit naive from the grown-ups, but it's still a response that you encounter. So is this what you're afraid of? That you might only sow general anxiety and not give them anything that they useful?
No, it's. I think, like, I mean, the concern from my end is more that you want them to be anxious at least a little bit, because there are lots of decisions that children might make and be perfectly happy with because they don't really have a fully developed concept of how bad the outcomes might be. And it's teaching children to be anxious of cases where, you know, maybe they feel there is a potential for a bad outcome, but not pushing it so far that that anxiety then prevents them from making use of the risk concept to make better decisions later on. But there is an element of anxiety that children don't have because they're like, because they don't know as much. They're like the younger, they want to have fun, and it's the balance between like provoking enough anxiety that they don't make bad decisions, but not so much that they don't make any decisions.
Exactly. Thank you for being so very specific about this, because this centers on the precise words that we use. Anxious is somehow, to my mind, it is a little bit of a fuzzy feeling. It sort of it provokes a physical response, and this is precisely, we would want to be a little bit before anxious. For instance, if I have, like I said, I have 3 daughters, and I try to raise them by reminding them 1,000 times, if you're careful and think about the situation that you're in, you do not need to be afraid. And the repetition is, I think, relevant, because you want to repeat this again and again and again, and at some point the kids will counter and say, "Why is it that you always tell me this?" And then I can tell them, because I want you to be alert to the fact that specific situations ask for specific responses. And this, I hope, will prevent this general anxiety. And maybe you did not really mean general anxiety, but this sort of amorphous anxiety that kicks in whenever a risky situation is contemplated. And this actually, indeed, as you said, prevents you to make use of the risk concept. But there's no harm in being careful. Careful, to my mind, is not something in which you already feel vaguely uncomfortable. Careful is more like being alert. So this is, but I agree that this is a very subtle distinction, and that it would probably almost on an individual teacher-student level, the teacher would have to calibrate his response to the specific level of anxiety that a child brings with him to the classroom. So this needs thinking about, but this is the answer that I would give. Is this?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what I was thinking. It's trying to find that kind of the middle ground. Yeah, but perhaps like anxiety is the wrong like word for the state you kind of want to get them at. But yeah, it's building up a sense of what makes you uncomfortable, and getting used to feeling like that and what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for the answer.
You're welcome. Thank you for engaging me, and thank you for sharpening my thinking.
And I think we got one more question from Adolphus.
Yes. Oh, I've got one question as well.
Oh, you've not spoken yet. Go ahead.
Let her go first.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, thank you, Annie, for your fantastic presentation. I got really engaged, and I brought my children to listen to you. And I learned a lot from you, and I really found the picture from the donuts is really important, because I'm investigating into the uncertainty which people experiencing right now in the pandemic, but these are older people age 65 and a plus. And I think the concept which is from the uncertainty is mainly dominated in a negative, with a negative attribute. And this tolerance of uncertainty is already connected or is mostly connected to anxiety. And there is, as far as I've known, so for now, it's not related to a chance. It's not related to the positive options which can be in this uncertainty where we can benefit from. And this is one point, and I think it's an important way to engage and to look what kind of benefits do we have to experience this uncertainty. And the second point is what I'm really interested in, and Helen is already gone, but I would have liked to speak to her as well. She said about the role in the media. So my investigation is going to, so I've interviewed these participants and I asked them, what do you think about media talking about this COVID-19? And I would say most of them said, I switch off the radio or the TV as soon as I listen something about COVID-19, because I'm getting anxious, I'm getting depressed, I can't stand it any longer. And then this should be addressed as well to see what kind of role does media play in this establishing an atmosphere of fear, instead of, as you said, a graduated way of, okay, we know this, what we know for now, but we probably have increased our knowledge tomorrow, but this is what we don't know, and that's why we take some precautions. And so yeah, it's not a real answer, but it's but I would like to or question I would like to discuss with you, but I think it's important to acknowledge it.
Absolutely, yeah, because that's, for most people, that's the way that they get the majority of their information. And again, we know from psychological research that if you present an article about a disaster, people will have a certain amount of anxiety or fear or sadness about this. If you then present the same information 5 times, their level of anxiety and fear will rise. And this compromises, of course, their consequent decisions. Of course, it's something that some people might take disadvantage of. For instance, the moment that there's a burglary in your street and it gets broadly advertised, more people are likely to buy anti-burglary equipment for their houses, which I'm not saying that this is a wrong decision, but it's a strange way to make use of the available information, because why do you suddenly become alert to something that has always happened and the frequency has not changed, but now because it's happening in your street, sometimes now you start installing stuff. And I think, again, as I said, the problem is that everyone's pulling on the same side of the rope, because we are focused on negative information, which is a good thing, because then we are more likely to buy the paper and read the article. And this is why they print this. I mean, in Holland, every year, I think it's very sympathetic. It always dies after the first attempt. Every year we have someone who publishes a newspaper with only good news. So they have pictures of smiling children and sunflowers growing, and maybe the little lambs have born, and everyone says, ah, and they never buy the paper. So yeah. Anyway, again, I can make it more graphic than this. We are all pulling on the same side of the rope, and there's no counterforce apart from having discussions like this, and maybe the open source of publishing that says, well, look at what we know and look at what we don't know. There is an overwhelming amount of information that we simply don't have. So there's no need to be overly fearful, but please allow for some measures being taken that afterwards in the evaluation might prove to be superfluous. But we don't do this because when someone does this, like a politician who spends money on a measure that afterwards was superfluous, well, almost always in the discussion in the media, their heads get cut off. So this makes for a very negative learning environment for politicians to start experimenting with being a little bit more open about this.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I think maybe one more question from Adolphus. Hello.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Simon. And yeah, sorry, because I was actually sort of like, you know, I thought we were addressing Enrique's question, and Enrique actually raised a very good point as to like why, you know, when making decisions, the politicians don't usually consult the key stakeholders, and for his case, that would be the teachers and students in the school when they try to like come up policies to reopening, you know, in the middle of this crisis, and I sort of like think back, you know, in Singapore, I think the same thing is happening because there's this culture in Asia whereby, you know, decisions should only be made by the people who are, you know, appointment holders, the higher rank officials, and those who are experienced in terms of their age. You know, there's always this, the older gets dominance over the younger ones, and that's actually a key issue as well, because like what you said earlier, I believe that there should not be this linearity between the age, you know, and this knowledge. Sometimes there needs to be a learning from both sides of the age group, and that's actually a problem as to why, you know, we always have this issue whereby the young, you know, our views don't get it's not accounted for. And then also about this thing when you mentioned about the voting age thing, the voting age, lowering the voting age, and in Singapore there's this big problem. So we had this mandatory conscription army, so the boys who are 19 years old go in, and you can imagine, you know, at 19 years old we learn to hold a gun and we shoot like real guns, you know, and with bullets and all that, but we're not allowed to vote until you're 21. So the thing is that we are allowed to vote at 21, but we are being trusted to hold a gun and you know, trust the decision as that we would annihilate our enemies, you know, and not be foolish with the guns, you know, at the age of 19. So this is a big irony in Singapore, which I'm really like against, because and that also brings about another question, like how young is young, like how what is this, how like you know, there's no like minimum age as to this concept of minimum age where decisions made by that age group will be taken seriously. It's always like there's only a category of kids and adults, and then there's no like a predefined barrier as to how low your what's the minimum age before, you know, my views are being considered. It's always the older generation, like the working adults, 25, 26, or in fact once you cross the 21 barrier, that's when you are given that the freedom to make decisions on your own. So that's actually another, and that's actually the issue. There's there's no fixed boundary as to where this you know, when are we taken seriously.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last bit.
Yeah, as in like there seems to be no fixed boundary as to when our decisions will be made, will be taken seriously into account. So I'm not sure, like you know, like as to like do you feel that there is like there's this issue of like, you know, this age, there's no like minimum age in some societies whereby, you know, your views will be taken in like seriously, you know, because we are still being seen as kids.
Yeah.
Within which.
Well, obviously, I'm a little bit shocked by the fact that you tell that boys of 19 are deemed eligible to fire explosives at each other and kill each other.
Not not each other, but as like we fire, yeah.
But then they are somehow not considered to be competent to make political decisions. So this is a bit of a shock. I didn't know this. And now you asked about a fixed boundary. You know, the real problem is that political structures are never developed in isolation. I think that when a society sits down and thinks about, well, how are we going to arrange decision making? You know, if you have a subject population and there's no chance of them to becoming active and they pose no real threat, there's no real reason to engage them in decision making, because it makes it very difficult, and you mostly don't get what you want. So this is why sometimes tyrannies happen. And then when the revolutionary potential of groups grows, this creates, and it's not always so negatively inspired as this, but this is what quite often happens. If we ignore them, they will set fire to our castle, so we'd better get around to include them in a certain way, to a certain degree, in our decision making. And this is how the democracy grew in the Netherlands, because in 1880 it was perfectly acceptable to say, you're a worker and you don't pay enough taxes. So I don't care if you were Plato, I don't care about your level of societal concern and your level of intelligence. Because you don't pay enough taxes, you're excluded from the decision-making process. And now a new element has entered the political decision-making sphere, and this is time. Because right up to about 1950, the most time, and I'm developing this idea as I speak, so it might be a bit tentative. We used to build cathedrals that maybe stood for 1,000 years. We used to discuss political boundaries that would last until the next war, which is about, I think on average, 70 years. So none of this had permanence. We now fill the oceans with plastics that will be around forever. We now fill caves in Finland with nuclear waste, which will stay there for tens of thousands of years, and the containers are guaranteed to last, I think, at least 6 generations. So in other words, we are manipulating and changing our world in a way that is completely unprecedented. And the fact that the political situations do not really take notice of this is in a way understandable, because this is a new phenomenon. But when I said political structures are usually responsive to the revolutionary potential of the groups that are now outside of the political system, I was saying this deliberately, because what I feel is that the younger groups that are now excluded from political decision making should realize that they have the potential for real political change. So I would invite people in these groups, and as you asked about the fixed boundary, there is no fixed boundary. If you're old enough to understand this, the relevance of what is happening, go out, protest, demand to be heard, demand to be included in the decision making. You know, I can't stress the importance of this. If you understand what the question is about, then you understand that it's not some kind of law of nature that says you are not old enough to take part in the decision. We have passed beyond this cultural constraint. There's an imperative. There's almost a natural imperative for you to become active if you understand what is happening and if you have something that you wish to be heard.
But don't get shot at by Donald Trump's stormtroopers.
This is worrying. This is worrying, because in a way, what you see indeed a revolutionary situation is building up. Because what is the responsibility? I'm a political scientist by heart, so I reframe most of the things I see in political terms. The number one responsibility of a political structure is to make sure that the things that need to be talked about get talked about by the people who feel that they are touched by the consequences of the decisions that are made. So as long as a political system is recognized as being inclusive and being responsible, it can sit fairly relaxed. What we see in America is that the political structures are increasingly not being recognized as being responsive to the needs of the people. They are not seen to be inclusive. So you see politics is literally moving to the streets. A protest is a political action. If you shoot at protesters, it's also a political action. Only it's these are political actions that are far removed from the constraint that we have when we simply have polite or more or less polite discussions. So this is a really explosive situation. I'm really worried about this because the almost the most valuable thing that you as a society can use is the idea that there will be that there is a political system that has legitimacy, so that you don't have to make all your own decisions, and that your rights will be respected, and that your interests will be response to within reasonable limits. If you lose this, well then there is a very strong reason for you to say, well, I'm not, this system does not recognize me, doesn't represent me, so why should I recognize the system? And then you move into a situation of very dangerous political instability, and we see this happening now in America. And I'm not trying to be trying to be the bearer of bad news, but I see a certain kind of revolutionary potential in the way that young kids are now taking to the streets. And if we're not responsive enough, this political struggle could also take to the streets. And then, of course, we would all lose, because the subtle discussions do not take place in a confrontation between the police and demonstrators. So we should all try our best to make the political decision making take place in the pacified surroundings that we've all put up in place in our respective countries.
Yeah, I'm not depressed at all.
Sorry, is this you, Scott?
Yeah, I'm not depressed at all.
He's not depressed.
Nee, so why do you say this? Do I come over as depressed? Was this a depressing discussion?
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, it's you know, the United States has been through worse. In the 60s, it was a lot worse than it is now. But it was very unpleasant at the same time, and I hope it doesn't get as bad as that. But there is a point in which, you know, the storming of the Bastille will occur. I just hope that people realize that and calm down a little bit before they get there.
Well, the historical evidence is fairly conclusive in that people usually afterwards regret what they've done.
Sure.
Okay, are there any further questions? If not, I'll finish recording and thank our speaker Anne for being with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for stimulating discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor.